Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about this very interesting book that I came across, and I just loved reading this book. So I found out about the author from Mohnish Pabrai. So I was listening to one of the speeches Mohnish gave at a university, and that's where I heard about the author Guy Spier, his name for the first time. And I started looking into, what work he does and who he is. And he's a value investor, of course. And I came across his book, The Education of a Value Investor, and gave it a read. And I'm so happy that I actually read the book because this is probably one of those books that I've been looking for a really long time now. When it comes to investments and investors and value investors in particular, I've read books such as The Snowball, which is based on Warren Buffett's life, and some other value investors like that. But this book, The Education of a Value Investor, is like, taking a deep dive into a value investor's life and journey as an investor, and how, Guy, so he's obviously talking about his own journey here. So he talks about how he has evolved as an investor, became a better investor through experiences, but also how those experiences changed his perspective towards life in general, and how that is helping him change some of the things he decided to do or maybe not do in his lifetime. And so it will continue. So I'm hoping that there'll be a edition 2 to this book sometime down the line from Guy. But this book really shows, for someone like me who's trying to learn more and more about other investors, other value investors, how they live their life. That's what I'm more interested in. It's not so much about, how do they make the investment. I think I've, gained quite a bit of knowledge and information in that area from really high profile investors like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, Mohnish Pabrai, who is a value investor, and he likes to clone Warren to a large extent. And then there are so many others like, John Templeton. So, but I was like searching to, find a piece of information or something out there in this world, or the internet, or through books, or through, connecting with other people, how some of these investors, how do they live their life? How do they make decisions, not just when they're making an investment, but in other areas of their life. And this book, The Education of a Value Investor, really talks about that specific topic. So really good book for somebody who's trying to understand, where do these choices and the process to make some of these choices come from. Because I think value investing is such a unique type of investing. It's nothing new, obviously, but you gotta be a special kind of person to be good at value investment, to be a good value investor. And I think I truly, truly believe this, that there is a moral connection to, how you survive and how long you can sustain to be a value investor, and a good one at that. So this book, it's a unique investment education book with a biography that sort of explains how one could possibly become a better value investor, and not just a better value investor, but somebody, who is really making these very value oriented, very conscious, right? Kind of doing that pros and cons analysis of every decision that they make in their life. So not only, just investments, but how do you, what do you do in your day? How do you meet people? Who do you meet? What kind of relations you want to maintain? Besides your job as an investor, your career as an investor, what else would you like to contribute your time and effort to? And for what reasons? So this is what it is for value investors. So Guy Spier is from the book, I found that he's a very humble guy who talks about his, mistakes. He's really open about sharing information about, some of the wrong decisions he made, which later turned out to be a lesson for him, and the pivot points he saw in his life so far, and which sort of led to him becoming more refined as a value investor and as an individual as well. So the book really begins or sort of brings forward the concept, which I truly believe is that value investors are people with a unique set of characteristics and temperament. It is a style of investing that forces one to adopt a moral standard or high moral standards and practices, like Warren Buffett talks about, or Charlie Munger. Value investment, I think, it's something, it either clicks with you, you get it right then and there, or it just doesn't. It doesn't make sense. So it's I've noticed this, when I talk to people, some people are just morally, ethically, characteristically inclined to value investment, and some people just don't get it. Maybe it doesn't appeal, maybe it doesn't look exciting enough, but it has got to do something with one's own personality, one's own choices and perspectives. So the book is the best one I have read so far that teaches better investment techniques in a very storytelling format. I've seen, like I said, I've seen books on investment principles and styles, but rarely, I read a biography that sums, that shows and, that tells us about the involvement of a value investor and how those decisions can affect one's life. And the reason why um, I was able to, kind of connect with what Guy is talking about in the book is because some of my own personal experiences have been like that. And there were lessons that I learned, not only which impacted my career as an investor so far, but which actually, showed me what are some of the choices I should be making in life, which connects with me, which, really is at the bottom of my heart, and which gives me that satisfaction that, I'm making those decisions that I want to, and I'm living my life the way I want to. The mistakes that the experiences that Guy talks about in the book are truly lessons for those of us who are willing to learn from. So as a value investor, and I think that's one of the other things you want to probably keep in mind when you try to give this book a read, is that you want to be able to connect with what Guy Spier is talking about. And I think when you are the type of value investor Guy Spier is, or someone with similar principles as Warren Buffett or Mohnish Pabrai or these kind of investors, then you're going to be able to resonate with the book easily. Guy talks about the wrong turns he took in his career because of the educational environment he was in. He was educated in really the Ivy League schools, universities. The limelight and the big name influences that some of these institutes attract, and that leads to the toxic environments, work environments that Guy eventually found himself in. I think there is that pressure involved when you sort of are associated with these big name universities that, once you have your education completed, you want to do something where you can sort of compare yourself to your fellow students. So, if somebody's working at really high profile companies, getting internships at high profile companies like Goldman Sachs, or, JP Morgan Chase, then you probably want to do the same thing to, really, I guess you have that pressure, and there is that inexperience as well at that stage in life where you want to be sort of, associated with that bunch, with your students and with your fellow students and all. And Guy found himself to be in that same position. Continuing on the topic of the influence of the environment, he talks about how he was sucked into the New York culture and the flashiness, where he actually felt quite out of place. So even though he did that because he thought that was the right way to grow and progress, because everybody else really was talking about it and talks about it, but internally he felt really out of place. He couldn't connect. Because inside he was a value investor type of a personality in New York with all its rush and hustle bustle and a bit of a there is a lot of competition and you have to really make an effort to fit in that place, and that means kind of showing off um, some of the stuff you've done, those kind of things, and keeping that always in mind that you want to stay in the limelight. And so those were the challenges which actually were sort of the wrong challenges that distracted him and in turn made him quite unhappy staying in that place. He later learned from Mohnish, and in turn from, Mohnish learned that from Warren, why it is so much beneficial to a value investors to stay in a dull, boring place and attract a lot less attention. So it works not only for the type of job that they do to kind of keep out the biases, but it is also something that works well with these people's personalities. It's not really to avoid, like salespeople, but also to get that peaceful, non-influenced environment that helps the investor make these unbiased analysis and investment decisions. And I cannot agree more with what Guy's talking about here. A dull, boring place away from the noise, away from the crowd, and that kind of a very high pressured environment helps tremendously. But I think it also speaks of the personality of a value investor here. You're rarely going to find these kind of people at Wall Streets or other financial hubs. No, exceptions are always there. They won't be part of the sales pitch or those kind of gatherings. And Guy eventually learned this about himself and decided to move to Switzerland to kind of get away from this noise, to get away from this pressure, to get away from this distraction, which actually ended up, actually caused him to make some of these wrong decisions. Mohnish has had a huge influence on Guy. So Guy talks about this thing that he noticed in Mohnish, that he's a more of a high risk taker. He has that attitude, and the risk taking doesn't really affect him or gives him that stress and anxiety because he's built that way. And how his investment strategy is mostly to copy or sort of clone Warren Buffett. Now, I think Moni started off with cloning Buffett, and he still does. But from what I could tell from his speeches and his interviews and everything, that over the years he's evolved to sort of grow more appreciative of some of the stuff Charlie Munger talks about, especially on the topics of psychology. So he's a big fan of Charlie Munger as well. Monish is a very open guy. He doesn't really care about trying to impress people around him. He's very true to himself, and this is what Guy has noticed and talked about in the book. So Guy traveled to India with Mohnish because Mohnish has got investments there. He's got a charity foundation there as well. So he visited India with Mohnish, visited his foundation Dakshina, and which sort of helps these lower income kids get ready and apply to IIT in India and some other places as well. Together they also met Warren, who they think and everybody thinks that I think that too, and I think Warren has probably been one of my first teachers because I learned so much about investing and value investment from him. So together they met Warren over that lunch. They immediately, sort of like fell in love with him. They admire him a lot and consider him to be the master. And Guy talks about that in the book, about his experience as meeting a master there. Warren showed his office. So Warren actually took them down to his office and he showed him his office. And Guy says that when they visited Warren's office, he kind of noticed that Warren had a very similar setup to what he is right now using, like, how he decided to move away to Switzerland. Warren tries to keep away from the distraction. He, has been in the same building for the longest time. He keeps his blinds closed mostly. There is a CNBC channel running on mute on the TV in Warren's office. A nice, comfortable sofa where Warren sometimes takes a nap during the day, and he has this interesting set of boxes, 3 boxes. That's what Mohnish says: in box and out of box, and there is another one called too hard box. So these are the boxes that help him shortlist his investment choices. So this out of the too hard box really is, telling us that Warren Buffett is so conscious of, what's his circle of competency, right? And he's very aware of the stuff that he gets and the stuff that he doesn't understand. So when he doesn't understand certain businesses, he is putting them in the too hard box. So that's a very, very conscious way of segregating your investment choices based on what you understand and what you don't, and making that conscious effort to really put your money in choices that are that you're really comfortable with, that you really understand, businesses that you really understand. Having that physical boxes right there keeps his mind on track, and that is so important for all of us as investors, because human mind can be forgetful and we can easily forget details when tasks become redundant. So that's what Guy tells us in the book, and this is what he noticed in Warren's office. The best part of the book is where Guy talks about, how through the process of moving away from a high influencing place like New York to Zurich and taking inspiration from Warren, from Mohnish, he realized that the process, that having a quieter, right, a more calm environment not only helped him become a better investor, but also helped him realize that he wanted to change things in his life to incorporate more of the same goodness that he started seeing in his investment career. So this chapter where Guy talks about this impact, this influence, it really resonated with me the most. Being a value investor isn't just about making good investment choices or maybe just creating that office work environment, but it runs much deeper. Having the right temperament, the personality type, and the outlook in life does have an impact. Now, like I said, I truly believe you are a value investor or you're not. It clicks with you or it just doesn't. It suits only certain types of personalities. Now, I'm not trying to say that, we are like out of the world being or special category of human species or anything like that, but I'm just talking about, the personality and the characteristics of a value investor. It's hard to be a good investor if everything else in your life, like your health, your relationship, your rest, the kind of rest you're getting, your sleep, your free time are out of order. Choices and preference matter too. I've read books on investment advice from great investors, but I have rarely seen anyone talk about their personal lives to this extent like Guy Spier has done. The impact it had on his investment careers or experiences, how it may have changed or refined him as an individual, not just as an investor, but as a human being. That's what Guy tells us in the book. That's what I learned the most from his book. And Guy talks about how in order to change and make it more than just investment, he started to learn how to play bridge, how to learn to play chess. So he started kind of, bringing those values and principles into other areas of his life. He traveled to India with Mohnish to visit his foundation, where he learned how so many people in India were happy despite being materially poor. So financially, the people, majority of the population is poor, but they are happy. They are content. That's what Guy noticed. He learned a lot from Mohnish, from observing his reactions when people would miss appointments or behave rudely with him, and yet through it all, how he stayed calm and composed and easygoing. So that's the biggest thing that kind of, hit me from about Monish's personality, that he's a very easygoing, down to earth person, and has a very rational attitude. So this is what Guy noticed in, with during his trips to India, that, people seemed a lot content there. Now, if you think about it, I mean, the developed countries in the world, such as the United States, we have a lot of anxiety and depression issues, and these are only growing with time. Um, Even though, we financially and materialistically, we have far more than some of these places, other places. Now, the interesting thing is that even though we don't have to worry about, putting food on the plates, or how do we pay the rent, those kind of issues are not as, hard to navigate here in the US, but the anxiety and depression issues are increasing with time, especially in the COVID days. I mean, there has been such an uptick in anxiety and depression. Like, psychologists and therapists are booked in for like months in advance. So maybe this talks a little bit more about, how rapidly spreading material wealth is not going to really, have a positive influence on our mental health, as one would sort of expect, right? I mean, what would be your biggest worries? It would be about how do you, arrange the next meal? How do you keep the roof on your head? But there is a lot more that goes on in, in us, in humans, and, money and material financial stabilities, material wealth doesn't really um, correlate to our mental health and well-being. And so, what's happening, and what we can also notice now, is that India, as it's growing, as it's becoming more financially stronger, as people are just becoming more financially stronger, you're also seeing an uptick in the number of anxiety and depression related issues in the country. So, this is not just, specific to one country, but I think it has to do more with certain environments and how we're living our lives. Guy learned a lot about his life living, and also says that he became a better investor when he started doing all of these non-investment related activities. In the book, he also talks about the tools for investing, and one of them that he talks in more detail about is how we do research for a investment, the specific order of doing research, where, he says that he would start off with the least biased sources of information, like the 10Ks and the 10Qs, the proxy statements, and the accountant's audit letters is also key for him. He goes through that. The management's introductory letter is also something Guy likes to read carefully, just to see, what they have to say about the business, about their expectations for the future growth of the business, and to get an inside idea about whether they are honestly trying to communicate uh, the genuine information about the business, or is it just a, like a PR piece. He mentions that alongside how, when Berkshire released the offering documents for its B class shares, it stated that Warren and Charlie won't buy them at that stated price. So this is how open these amazing people are, Warren and Charlie. Guy then also likes to pay attention to earnings announcements, the PR releases. He does read articles about the business, other stuff in the media as well, press coverage, but that comes much later. First, he starts off with the unbiased sources, where he can do the analysis on his own and really try to make a judgment about the business, about the health of the business, the future of the business on his own, without all of these other influences. So, among his investing tools, gathering information in the right order is important. Another rule that he likes to talk about is don't talk to management. He learned it from Mohnish, and he used to talk to management before, but ever since, he had a discussion about it with Mohnish, he realized that it's best for an investor not to talk to a management, not to talk to, the top leadership at the organization, because they are more of a sales, they're salespeople more than anything else. They know how to sell the company, and that's what they are doing with an investor. They're selling their company. I agree. And for me, I think, I've never tried to talk to managements is because first and foremost, I mean, it's their word against ours or something like that. I agree totally that, they're salespeople first and foremost. But I really like to focus on businesses that can survive with any kind of management. The business got to be so strong that sure, we have the CEO who may be a great CEO today, but doesn't mean they're going to hang on to the business forever. They might leave the company down the line, and the business should still be able to survive in those kind of situations on its own. So, the business has to be really strong. The fundamentals of the business have to be really strong, and that has always been my priority. And I think that just makes it easier for me as well. It's hard to, uh, make judgment calls about people, about the honesty that about the people, how honest one is being, things of that sort. And there are a lot of gray areas involved in that work, and I typically like to stay away from it because I don't think I'm really good at it. So Guy talks about this interesting checklist Monish got him started on, and I'm also doing this right now. I actually started doing this many years ago, but I think I kind of stopped doing it. But after reading the book, I dusted off that document, and now I'm kind of continuing doing it. So he writes his own mistakes on the checklist, and which has helped him, kind of compare his future investments again, right? And he says that it helped him avoid a lot of the bad investment choices. And I think that's really true. So a checklist that kind of talks about not only your own mistakes, but that is obviously that is obviously where you want to start, but it is also going to be really smart to have some of the other mistakes made by other investors and for what reasons kind of done in that. Monish did this. Monish actually, he started off doing this checklist. He shared this idea with Guy Spier, who, took up the idea because he found it so interesting and useful. And then Monish, what he did was he hired a couple of interns, and he, really asked them to search up on all these top investors and the different choices they've made, how those investments turned out, and do a little bit more analysis about, why those were the wrong investment choices, and kind of added that information to the checklist and categorized the checklist so that, when these very smart individuals are thinking about an investment plan, an investment strategy, an investment goal, they have this checklist with all of the things that we are not supposed to do, and they kind of compare their investment against these categories, these checklist items, and it helps them, shortlist their investment plans, their investment ideas. Now, in the later part of the book, Monish has kind of discussed a couple of investments he had made over his career and how they turned out to be. And I found this really interesting and very nice because he put in his analysis of why he went in, why he came out of that investment. And it really shows, what was his thinking process there? How did he analyze that to be a good choice or a bad choice? And when did that realization come up, right? When did he realize that this was not an investment that was working out for him? So he talks about his investment in EVCI. It's Career Holdings Corporation. So Interborough Institute owned the EVCI, Career Holding Corporation, and Guy made an investment in this company. This company had figured out a way to provide a college education to students with limited resources, financially strained students. Many were students who did not graduate high school either. So these students actually received financial aid grants that exceeded the cost of Interborough's education course. So these students received education free of cost while EVCI made money in the process because of the grants involved there. Now, Guy's investment helped the company pay off some of the debt that the company had owed because of acquiring, And so Interboro acquired EVCI, and that's where they accumulated the debt. And Guy's investment helped pay off the debt. So this was a smaller company when Guy decided to invest in. Initially, Guy saw that his investment grew multiple folds. The board agreed at the time to give huge pay raises to the top two executives of the company. The CEO saw his base salary grow from $326K to $621,000. But the business generated something like less than 3.5 million in profits. The pay raises meant that about a quarter of the profits went actually in paying those wages. So later, the company also saw class action lawsuits for securities fraud. So they started getting into troubles and those kind of things. Now, in 2007, EVCI decided to close Interboro, and during the same year, the New York Board New York Board of Regents enacted new test regulations that made it hard for the Interboro students to receive that financial aid, which the whole thing was based off on. That was how EVCI was really making that money. So it had to close its shops, and after realizing that most of the students would no longer qualify for that financial aid, for that grant. Now, Guy met with the CEO at the time, of when the board decided to give those pay raises, to discuss, how these huge pay raise, and perhaps, he was hoping that he would be able to convince the CEO to switch with to stock options, and it turned into a complete mess. He talks about this in the book, where the CEO started yelling at him in the middle of the restaurant, and it was just a total chaos. Now, what is Guy's takeaway from this? Looking at he says that he's going to be now very careful about looking out at the members of the management team and trying to make sure that, obviously we all have issues, but he definitely don't want to invest in companies where, you have the management that has got some personal difficulty. Like this CEO apparently had a very bad divorce case happening, and he was really stressed out person. So, he wants to pay attention to some of those things, personal difficulties that might affect their ability to act for the best interest of the shareholders. And also, has the team done anything self-serving that appears dumb? Now, I probably would not have made an investment in this company, EVCI Interboro, because sure, I understand, the management and all, and it's difficult, right? I mean, when it comes to people, when it comes to management, it's difficult to assess or even know what's going on in their personal lives. I guess you can get some feel when you meet them, but, it's a very challenging task. But I would have probably not invested in this company because they had just one customer base. Their only customer base were these students who qualified for the financial grants from the state. And as soon as those financial grants were closed, the whole business collapsed because they had no other customers. That was their only one and sole customer base. So that would have been my number one concern. What happens if these financial grants, the financial aid these students were getting, would for some reason, not be there for them? How would this business continue making the money? And they couldn't. That's what proved out over time, that, when the financial aid was stopped, then they just couldn't function any longer as a business. They had to close down their shop. Now, there is another one that he talks about, is an investment in Tupperware. Guy invested in Tupperware, a company that makes plastic containers, and I think most of us know what Tupperware is. He was attracted to the business, which showed great profit margins and return on equity at the time. He talks about how, Tupperware, the way they managed their sales and how they got their sales made was that, somebody would have to host a Tupperware party, and Guy wanted to get that whole experience firsthand, so he decided to host a Tupperware party because that was how most of these sales happened. And he wanted to really understand, how does the sales process work out, how people are buying Tupperware, whether it is a successful strategy. But when he made the investment, He described it as a slowly dying business. He talks about how one or the other region of the business was always losing money, even though these parties were like fabulous. These Tupperware parties were, very energetic, very salesy gathering, and a lot of these Tupperware was sold in these parties. But there were other problems with the business. It was a dying business. Not every region performed successfully, and that was, and I think these are the most difficult businesses to kind of, these are probably the more difficult ones, that the slow dying ones. I mean, it takes a little bit of a time for an investor to realize that, this is a business that's going to collapse over time, or maybe, it's just not going to go anywhere. But because it happens in sort of like trickles over the years, you kind of miss that boat, right, to some extent, and you only realize later, much later, if you're not really, aware of what's happening with that investment, that this is not going anywhere. That's why Guy says that it was a slowly dying business. Um, Intense competition and relatively high price for the plastic containers was killing the business slowly. But it took Guy a few years to realize this. And that's the biggest challenge when it comes to these businesses that, show changes very, very slowly and in the wrong direction over the years. Guy eventually sold his shares for what was the purchase price that he paid a few years ago. Now, his lesson learned from this investment is that Tupperware is actually not a value-oriented business like Costco and Walmart are, who benefit their customers first. Costco, the model that they would have has been described by Nick Sleep as a scale economics shared model, which is where, they have created this whole setup with about working with really high quality vendors where, there's suppliers, there's sellers, the merchants, and they get to benefit because of the vast quantity of product that they can sell at Costco. And Costco really passes down most of that high quality benefit to its customers. So it's benefiting and growing along with their merchants and vendors and their customers. Costco really makes a very minimal amount of profit on the products that they actually sell. Most of their earnings comes from the memberships that they offer. And so Tupperware is not that type of a business, even though it has all these Tupperware parties and, there's a host who's selling and they get a commission and all of that, but it's not really a scale economics shared type of a model. And so Tupperware did not benefit their customer. If this was a business I looked at for investment, I would probably have not invested in it for one simple reason: lack of a moat. Now, just because it was a new concept where, we were making all of these plastic containers, Tupperware was doing that. But what's the security here? I mean, why can any other business not copy this idea and do it for a cheaper price, which they did? That's what happened, right? As competition increased, that's where Tupperware faced a lot of the problems: lack of a moat. So, plastic containers are made from a waste product of from oil refining. Now, if Tupperware could do it, anyone else could use the same technologies, use the same wastage, and create those plastic containers. And that did eventually happen and really, hurt the business. There is another chapter in this book called Doing Business the Buffett Pabrai Way. Now, here, Guy is trying to reiterate the point of value investing, that value investing is not merely a stock picking strategy, but it is so deeper and so much more than the financial wealth creation. A quest for true value in every aspect of life. For some, it could mean buying a Tesla today. For others, it could simply mean kind of, slowing down and bringing more calm and peace in life. Guy talks about an inner journey towards achieving something less tangible than financial wealth, but much more valuable. And that's what he's going after. It could involve asking questions like, what do I need all this money for? What do I truly desire in life? What will give me contentment? Considering we get one life to live and time is limited, what is it that I truly want to do, leave as my legacy in this world? So thinking about these things. And value investors, I think, at one point or another in their life will start looking at these aspects of their life, their goals, their legacy. Figuring out the inner journey is also critical to becoming a better investor. Understanding one's own insecurities, biases, shortcomings will make us a better investor. When it comes to investing, saying no to opportunities works well a lot of the times rather than saying yes. Knowing one's biases and shortcomings is super critical. Staying with that circle of competency that Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett talks about all the time. Understanding psychological behaviors is super important that seems to have mastered. And there is so much to learn from Charlie Munger's, mental models, psychological analysis. It truly makes us understand ourselves. So that's where it starts. Charlie and Warren say that, a lot of times, what they have really prioritized and focused on is trying not to do the stupid thing, right? So understanding one's own shortcomings and biases and psychological behaviors is really important to being good investors. Moral ethics matter as much. Doing good for others, being ethical, being fair, making investments in businesses that bring progress and goodness to mankind, working with honest, not greedy managements while being honest and not greedy ourselves is so, so important. And I truly believe, from my own experiences and from what I've seen in others, I really think there is a deep connection between, value investment, being a value investor, and moral ethics, or, being morally inclined to do the good things. In my personal experience, I've learned that there can never be a good deal with a bad person. Exhibiting these traits, surrounding ourselves with such people, is really important and good for value investing in business and life too. A lot of value investors will agree to what I'm sharing here today. They're probably doing most of these things and or have probably learned from their experiences. Nick Sleep talks about it as well. I've learned some of these important things from my own experiences, and also, I'm learning more as I'm getting to understand myself more and more with time. And I'm getting to learn about some of these things from other investors like Spier. This is one of those books that I have been looking or had been looking for the longest time because I wanted to understand how these value investors make other choices in life. How does it impact their decision making? Being a value investor is not about the money. People think that, investors really care about the money, but it is so far from the truth. It is not about the money. It is about the choices. It is about, how we are inclined to make certain choices. And that speaks a lot about the individual as well.